welcome to Learning at Large, all three of you. And it's fantastic to have a three-way panel today. Very excited. And we're going to be talking about skills today and skills-based organizations. A small change going on out there that many people, I'm sure, will have absolutely heard of. And obviously, I'm joking. It's not a small change. It's something quite massive, actually. And that's what we're going to get into today. So I like to ask some questions that help set the scene for our listeners, and then we can kind of dive a bit more deeply into the topic, if that's okay. So I'm going to get stuck straight in there. And I really want to just cut through the kind of buzz around skills and make sure that we kind of can set the scene that this is perhaps a meaningful breakthrough and not just a buzzword. So Sandra, I wondered if you might start us off, actually. I wondered if you could kind of explain in a nutshell, like why the focus on skills is so important and what's the promise of a skills-first approach?
So I think the focus on skills in and of itself is not the big breakthrough. Like, as you said, we've been talking about skills for decades. The big breakthrough is the fact that now we are able to have actual meaningful data on skills, both in terms of, I think, what I think of as the denominator, which is like the skills that you need in a role, a division, a geography, an organization, and the skills that you have in the form of individuals who roll up into teams and to, again, orgs and divisions. What's changed is the fact that, more recently, AI has been able to kind of essentially like scrape data from job postings and other sources to get an idea, a foundational concept of what skills do you need. Again, AI and technology more generally is allowing us to get signals on individuals' skills and also verification of individual skills. So again, it's not that the skills in and of themselves are the breakthrough, it's the data infrastructure that it allows, or that it allows it to occur. And when you have all of this data, when you have high quality data on what you need and what you have, you are actually able to make very informed, better informed decisions across the entire talent life cycle, hiring for the right skills, developing the right skills, managing people based on skills as opposed to whatever we manage them on today, designing learning programs to address skills gaps and then assessing the degree to which those learning programs have in fact shorn up those gaps. This is the big breakthrough, and I think it's kind of exciting.
So for you, you're seeing it's almost like the shift to being data-led is almost the thing that's overarching above whether it's skills or
Exactly.
not.
Yeah. And I think that's very, very important because I think everybody talks about skills like it's like either like the end of the world or like, I don't know, like it's this massive thing. It's not. It's just data. And skills, to be clear, are not the only source of data that matter. There are many others, but they are a very, very important source.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for kicking us off with that. That's really helpful. Laurie, I wonder if I can turn to you then. So Laurie Niles-Hofmann. Are we all speaking the same language? Sandra just painted a bit of a picture for what it might mean when we talk about being skills-based. But if you were to describe what a skills-based organization was to someone who's maybe never heard of one, I'm sure people have, what would you say?
There's in my experience, there's a lot of different flavors. Like they're all going in the same direction, but or maybe we talk about different layers of maturity. So if when I talk to people about a skills-based organization, I think that what the nirvana, what people think they're going towards, but I've yet to see anyone really achieve, is that the company knows everybody's skills, they know what skills they need, and they upskill according to that. And the way that work is done is fundamentally different. That people accomplish tasks based on the skills that they have, and so it's a different model as opposed to you have a role and this is kind of what you do. Now, I've not seen anybody do that. Maybe you sort of see that in sometimes like in a big four in consulting because they go on different engagements and that's going to utilize different skills. But life just isn't that pure. And I don't think anybody wants to give up their title and nobody wants to say like, oh, I'm a VP today, but tomorrow I'm a senior manager. And what does that all mean? Okay, so scrap that. But really skills-based organization is, and to Sandra's point, a very astute point, is it's just a piece of data, but it's looking at your employee base and your your organization through a different lens, rather than just looking at it from a title, which is a very large aggregate. It's looking at things a little bit more specifically and understanding people more at a granular level as to what they're able to do and what you need as an organization. So I almost think of it like, think of your company almost like a factory that you're supply chain managing, what you have, and you don't want things to go out of date and to spoil. You also don't want to have a surplus, because then you have too much, and you don't want to have a shortage. So that's kind of what we're looking at when we think about skills. Now, don't even get me started on the definition of a skill, because I've sat in more meetings than I can count where we've said, oh, is this a skill? Well, maybe that is a skill. Honestly, in my experience, a skill is whatever you need, or whatever the company needs that skill to be. And I'm willing to go Fight Club on that one, because really that's not the debate to have.
Yeah, although it might come up later, but let's see. We'll put our boxing gloves on a bit later and fight that one out. Teresa, are you seeing anything different, in terms of the definition that Laurie just shared there? And I know that you're out there working in companies and kind of seeing what they're doing. Where are they at? Are they, in terms of that journey to the skill base? How far have they come?
Yeah, there's a lot of ambition out there, but additionally, there's also a lot of fragmentation in where people are getting to, and it links to a lot of what Laurie's just said, is defining your skills strategy. What is the definition for you and your organization? And the fragmentation that I'm seeing is where this sits. So it's not whole system change, it's fragmented because it might sit in L&D, it might sit in talent, it might be driven by one part of the business that's become aware of the research that's out there. So that's the challenge. And then the other gap that I'm seeing is that skill awareness and having the data, but then activating those skills and using those skills. So skills utility and them not being embedded into workflows. And I think, as Sandra said, it's that demand side management. And I've been talking to my clients about, because I'm looking at job architecture as well, and org design, is looking at proactively manage them from a product lens. So managing skills, roles, etc., particularly with AI and what's changing there. So you're looking not dissimilar actually to the work that you did with Red Thread in the research report, where you're looking at what's static, what's dynamic, what's more generic, what's very specific to your organization. So that's where I'm starting to move my clients towards, is much more portfolio management of their organization and their skills.
Thanks for that. And I'm sure we'll get into it in a moment, but interesting that the skills utilization is coming up,
Yes.
Perhaps
Yeah.
you've identified people who have a skill, or perhaps they've been trained on a skill, and yet is that skill being used? Maybe it's a skill of the future, maybe they're yet to work out how to close that gap. But yeah, okay, interesting. You mentioned the fragmentation there, that the skills kind of, who owns skills or skills frameworks? A lot of people talk about the initiative having come from kind of talent teams in the first place, perhaps, rather than L&D. But I'm interested in what the shift to being skills-based means for L&D. Most of our listeners out there are learning managers, learning leaders. Maybe Teresa, you can carry on with this one, since you were talking a moment ago. If that's okay.
Yeah.
So what do you think it means to those in L&D? What kind of pressures did it put them under, or is it a change for the better for them?
It ought to be, yes. And it's exciting. And I often see people start with excitement, but it's also exposing. So it's really exposing learning and development towards that skill activation and the skill utilization that I mentioned. And it's thinking about their investments, where and how are they investing in skills? And again, linking through to that portfolio. So I'm tending to think in a systems way about how you're managing that full skills ecosystem and across different processes. The other thing that I think is a challenge is retrofitting processes. So rather than starting with the change management and the process mapping, etc., up front, that it's left until people start to launch, and then there's a lot of backward pedaling to be done. And also the co-creation element as well, that goes back to those definitions that Laurie was talking about, is making those definitions co-created and giving the ownership to people within the business, and not necessarily L&D or talent. because they can then drive the changes if you're putting the skill ownership out to subject matter experts, particularly also with the roles when I was talking about the job architecture as well. It drives them to own those changes and then drives what's needed from learning and development, but working in collaboration. I'm not saying that one works separately. It's so important more than ever for that collaboration to happen. And otherwise, it's going to be a case of if you don't pay now, you'll pay later, and you'll pay much greater.
Brilliant, thanks for that. Sandra, is that similar to what you see, you know, that kind of co-creation and collaboration being vital here for L&D, and you know, what do you see as kind of being their role in all of this?
So again, my perspective is coming from an organization that has been doing skills for 30 years. Like we didn't have to transform. So there was no, as you said, like Teresa, like process retrofitting. Like we've just, as a business, been designed this way. And so I can only speak to our experience as opposed to what will be universally applicable. But in our organization, skills definition is owned by the business, period. Like it's not owned by anyone in the talent organization, because you know, from you know, like from my point of view, like we as talent leaders, as learning leaders, we don't know the skills that are required for these jobs. Like I have no idea. We rely on the business, who are leveraging skills data from the market, from our internal systems, to determine what are the skills that are needed today, right? And that's changing, right? You look at that definition every, you know, few weeks or a few months, few years, whatever it is. But when the business tells us what are the skills that are required now for this role, and they tell us what those skills look like in practice, which is really very important. From that information, then we can go and develop learning programs to support the creation of those skills. And again, when I say like that, it's very important to talk about the skills and context. I think that is it's a non-trivial point, right? Skills in and of themselves are, I mean, not worthless, but they don't create value. They only create value when applied in the context of doing real work, so tasks. And so for us, when we are understanding and well, supporting the business, we need to understand the skills and the tasks, because the way that we define and build learning programs is actually starting with like, you know, task outcomes first. Sometimes very complex outcomes, sometimes a combination of tasks, but then we're building learning programs to support that. And we're using the tasks as essentially like skills validation activities that people can do the task. We assume that they have the skills, and we build those in across the life cycle. So for me, it's more of an issue of learning, driving change that is defined by the business.
That makes a lot of sense. Laurie, would you agree with that? Like, is that what you see as well? Or have we got a different kind of plea for L&D, you know, to be doing something different or to be taking a different role within that picture?
I completely agree with both, and I think the thing that I maybe just add is in terms of pressure that it puts on L&D. What I really see is that now they have to operate with a lot more precision. It used to be that they could be like, oh, we're going to build this manager's program. We're going to stuff everything in it that we think people need. They're going to go on it for 3 weeks, and then I'm going to send them back, and with some spit and polish, they're going to be a new people manager, right? Like, you know, that's just one example. And that just, in my opinion, has never worked, and it wastes a lot of time. Some people may have already come from a managerial role, but oh no, we have to sheep dip them into this so that they are our kind of manager. And it just starts getting, you know, quite ridiculous. So I think the pressure for L&D is to be very specific, to say, what does it mean to have 17 versus 18 people with this particular skill? And how do I find those people that have adjacent skills that we maybe would use to then upskill them in more rapidly into this particular skill? Like it's really thinking differently, as opposed to, you know, I think we all have agreed that just having a learning library and say go at it doesn't work. Now we have to go even deeper and get even more targeted in what we're doing. And not all L&D organizations or, you know, have teams have operated this way, and they're uncomfortable with that. But I love data, so to me, I think this is it's better for everyone. It's better for the business. It's better for the individuals. It makes learning meaningful.
Yeah,
Can I
great.
jump on that? Actually, like
Absolutely.
the other super important thing, and again, I come from, prior to this role, I was a researcher, right? I researched learning and to do that, you have to measure learning. And that's something that I think is another implication of this orientation towards skills is that if we're focused on data, we actually now need to create data to determine if someone has developed a skill or series of skills as an outcome of a learning program, which I think is a paradigm shift in many cases for L&D organizations who are just, as Laurie said, right, used to like putting out programming and like assuming that that programming has done something without having measured it at the beginning so that we knew what people already could do before the program, and then measuring it again afterward to seeing what delta exists, and what gaps are going to proceed. And like this to me is a very exciting I think evolution in L&D, because I mean it should have already been happening, but it wasn't. And I think that this kind of push towards skills and just data more broadly is going to kind of like uh, cause us as a field to level up.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, Teresa used the word exposing, right? So I think that's a great word to use. Like your data, it hasn't always been in L&D's pockets or in their hands or even in their minds, right? Like they haven't always been reaching for it, using it, might not know how, right? We know that there's a skills gap there, ironically. But I think one thing that Laurie also mentioned there was, about acknowledging adjacent skills. And I think, Sandra, you mentioned the context around skills being important. So is another awakening, moving away from that siloed thinking of learn X and then magically somehow you'll do X, in some kind of box. So I wanted to ask you, and you can wave at me if you want to chip in on this one, but there's been a lot of talk about skills mapping, this idea that you can map out the skills that you might have, or the skills gaps that you have right now, or the ones you have in future. And it sounds like it's quite a simple thing, right? On paper, you could see all the skills. But is the idea of mapping out individual skills just way too simple? Like, can they truly be compartmentalized? Like, who wants to chip in on that? Is that something you're seeing here?
I'll have a go with some of the research that I'm seeing out there that is exciting me, and that's about skills complementarity. So it's sort of beyond skill adjacencies. So it's looking at which groups of skills complement one another and then create more value as a combination. So there's some research by, I think it's Oxford University are involved in this research, and I think it's really important for learning and development to start to look at, because it will get them to, again, think very differently about their investments. And going back to the management development scenario, way beyond that sheep dip, and moving towards personalization alongside all of that data, that great data that Laurie and Sandra have spoken about. You can start to use your data very differently and think differently, because trying to use a new system with an old way of thinking just isn't going to work. It's just going to break, and then the business won't believe in what's being done, and it will be like past failed implementations and get shut down. So that's what's really exciting me about this research and the data that they're mapping out within it as well, and particularly because they're including AI thinking within that, and what's the impact of artificial intelligence on the skills complementarity. So where can people quickly reskill, upskill to maintain value? So that's something that I'm really excited about.
I think there are three separate ways to think about skills in connection with each other. So one is adjacency, right? And I think it's exactly what Teresa said. Like how easy is it for you to go from this upskill or go from this skill to this skill? Like how connected are they? The second is what we have found is that skills actually tend to exist in clusters from a data perspective. So if you have skills A and B and D, even if we haven't assessed it, we can assume that you actually have skill C, because again, when you've learned certain skills, you tend to learn them in combo with other things. So that's another factor. And what we have found is that we do need to measure the granular skills, but actually from a data perspective, we actually have shifted more and more and more to looking at the cluster. You can't get clusters without the individual components. So you really have to do both. But the third thing I think that we have found as an element around skills is that, again, I'm going to go back to tasks or application of skills, is that in the wild, skills are never deployed individually. Like they always are being used together in order to do meaningful work. And so again, for us, it's really important when you are thinking about skills to be understanding them in context, not just in the context of other skills, but in the context of the actual nature of the work that you're doing, right? So I can have a communication skill, but if I'm communicating to a client, I can be great at that and also very poor at communicating to my direct reports. Like you need to be understanding skills in the context of the work that's being leveraged or they're being leveraged to do in order to truly get a picture of what an individual is capable of, and then leveraging that information to helpfully match them to projects or roles or work or in whatever.
So that, like, I guess what Teresa's saying is the whole system thinking needs to change around, like we step out of, hopefully, you'd really hope, like for a lot of L&D teams out there, that they, even in competency frameworks, there might have been some contextualization and some complementarity, but, from what I've seen, it's often not necessarily the case, and even the contextualization is still too small, it's too shrunk. So yeah, okay, that's really interesting. I guess we're at a point where personalization is going to become easier and easier as well, right? So there's now no excuse, there's nowhere to hide if you're not serving up somebody's with what they need in their context for their tasks, right? Does anyone want to talk more about the kind of role of AI and that kind of modeling here?
I'll jump in on this. I mean, as we get more into agentic AI, and we're going to see a lot more automation, particularly of our learning systems. They need to run on data, and so the data that we have and how we understand, skills, adjacent skills, skills clustering, and all of that is going to be the fuel that serves those ecosystems. So if we don't have that, it doesn't matter how much we're going to go into that world of AI, because it's garbage in, garbage out, right, Gigo? And so that's where we have to really start thinking and laying the tracks right now, because otherwise that's not going to operate at capacity and at speed, right? So and I think that's something also there's on the flip side of that, if you look on the other side of the coin, I don't necessarily know if L&D or if anyone really in a lot of organizations is appreciating how fast the skills are going to change and how quickly this is going to move. And I'm not saying nobody, I mean, I know lots of people do, but like when you start looking at it from an organizational standpoint, this is like nothing we've ever seen before, and how companies are going to have to adapt, and the agility for that is just going to be so extreme. And so there's a big plate that L&D needs to step up to be prepared for that, because I think it may be a question, if they don't, they may get pushed out of the way to just get it done.
I want to just touch back then. Thanks for that. That's really helpful. Like touch back on the validation point, which I think Sandra's spoken a lot to so far, around the use of data, having to, I think, create the data is what you said, to actually validate the skills that are there. I wondered if you can help bring that to life, maybe with a bit of an example, but also if those skills are changing all the time and what people are needing to learn or do, ideally do, is the focus there, then, what kind of validation system might you have in place in an ideal world to kind of keep up with that? Have you got an answer to that one, or is that something that we're still on a journey towards?
I would punt that over to Dr. Loughlin, because I know she's got a seven layers, is it? Magic number 7. Yeah, so I definitely punt that over.
Okay, well, since you asked. So, okay. So basically, skills are a latent construct, meaning that you cannot measure them directly. Even if you saw evidence of it, you're only seeing evidence of it in one context. That doesn't mean you can see it in another context, right? Back to the communication example. And so the way that we have done this over time is that we have, and it's also, by the way, expensive to collect skills data directly. It doesn't matter, even if you're using AI, it's going to end up being costly. So the way that we have devised our kind of skills profile development for individuals is a combination of inferred skills from all kinds of sources, right? Scraping LinkedIn job postings or profiles, looking at your network analysis, who do you work with regularly, looking at what courses you have gone through in an LMS. It's not, again, to me, it's not an evidence of a skill. It's an evidence that you've been exposed to information, which maybe means a skill, who knows? Right, there's a number of different sources of inference that require no other lift other than data scraping. Then on the other side, we have many sources of verification, which again are looking at different levels of quality and verification. So we can leverage AI or humans or both to look at your work product and actually glean information around your skills. We can look at certification exams and match to skills, have an idea that maybe you can do this thing. We can look at feedback, especially for soft skills, from people that you're interacting with. Are you a warm communicator? Are you empathetic? We can ask your manager, your peers, your clients. We're also looking at self-report, which is, again, like not a great measure, but it is still an important measure. And so we have all of these different sources. Each of those sources is weighted in terms of explanatory value. And collectively, that gives us an idea of what skills you have today. Now, in terms of what skills you need, right? This is, again, a constantly like changing goal. And the way that that goal changes is back to the very beginning, right? The business on an ongoing basis looks at the data and says, okay, we need to change the skills requirements for this role or task or whatever, this job or whatever it is. And once that is determined, then of all, the people organization like realigns ourselves. But when it comes to learning, now we communicate to employees, oh, hello, the goalposts have changed again. Here are the new skills you need. Here's how it looks. Here is formal learning, informal learning. And then here's the time horizon by which you need to demonstrate that skill in order to retain your role or progress in your career. Like this is how, again, it's not simple, right? It is a complex, data-rich environment that you need to create and then interpret and then leverage in order to actually understand what skills people have and need, and then to support and motivate them to develop those skills on an ongoing basis.
I guess like what a role is now, like today, versus what it might be in, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, even shorter, could be entirely different. Like, so what you might say that you do, where you might say, these are my strengths, this is what I'm great at today, you might have in fact have to jump through quite a few hoops to learn new skills. Eventually you're doing something completely different, right? Yeah, so it's an interesting one. You mentioned motivation at the end, which that idea of taking people with you. I want to pick up on the people point actually, and Teresa, my gut feel is that you might have some insights on this, but you can let me know if this isn't your bag. But so let's imagine we've got some skills and tasks mapped out for a particular area in an organization. But right now, today, like it could be a logistics department, for example. But right now, today, like everyone's continuing to do the job like they've always done it, right? So the ordinary employees out there do not know anything has changed. How do we move from where people are now, like what they've been used to, what their career development and performance reviews have been to today, to like a whole new system? I know this goes beyond L&D, but it shouldn't be beyond the horizons, right? It should be well within their thinking. So yeah, have you got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I go back to my earlier points about co-creation here, like from the outset to involve managers, employees, colleagues within that and help them design with you. When I've done change programs in the past, particularly large ones, it's always where I've been given or allowed to co-create, and that's where things have stuck. That's where they've been implemented. That's where other people will buy into them because it's been done with and not done to. And again, I go back to my point about doing things in old ways when it's I think more now than ever that co-creation is important with everything that is going on for organizations, for people, because of this, overuse of the word unprecedented change, but it really is. I've not seen anything like it in my lifetime, and I'm in my 6th decade nearly. So I am in my 6th decade, actually. I'll soon be in my 7th. That's scary. So I've definitely not seen anything. And I've worked in the education sector before and saw technology coming into education, and it's reminding me of that similar change then, and how scared and frightened teachers were and threatened. And it's also thinking about, because we're talking a lot about systems and things here, but it's also people's feelings, and they're often forgotten. And it impacted me even more because I chaired Professor Joseph Devlin at the Recent Learning Technologies, and he was speaking very much to this, is that it's that threat response, that anxiety that's created, particularly with AI, and how do you work with people to overcome that? And he gave some really great case studies. So if anyone gets the chance to watch that back, if they were at Learning Technologies, I really recommend it.
And is part of that fear not just because it's a different system, something new? There is fear of change, that can be that, but is it that fear of, being spotted for not having skills, for example, for not being ready for the future, for not being someone who could be part of the future, and for AI might come in and take some of the tasks that you do? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, it's like any change, but I think it's exacerbated. Fundamentally exacerbated with what's going on. So paying attention to that is more important than ever. I said before, not leaving it until the middle, the end. It has to be from the very start. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up to fail, and you're damaging credibility within different departments. People won't trust you. And if there's already a relative low trust there, and we see reports out all the time about the lack of trust and engagement in organisations, then you risk eroding that even further.
And I think, obviously, Sandra has come from a skills-based organisation. It was kind of, I think it was born one, wasn't it? Almost like from the early days. But for those who are making a change into that system, presumably then, based on what you were just saying about taking people with you and co-creation, this should be starting with pilots, right? Would you say that you find a pocket to work with in an organisation? Sandra, you've opened up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, you can't not do that, because there's no way that you're going to boil any of these oceans. It's just too huge. But I think the orientation toward where you're piloting needs to be, again, I'm focus on it needs to be done with the business. This is a business strategy. This is not an HR or an L&D effort. It's a business strategy. And so, if you're going to start this journey, first, I would say find the right people who's already thinking about this. I'll give you the answer. It's almost always IT. Not just IT, but almost always IT is clamoring for help. They understand data, they understand the technology infrastructure, and so they're actually a really good partner to start with. But go find whoever it is, right, in the organization, and then figure out what is an actual problem they're experiencing. If it's L&D, they definitely gonna have to learn something, right? So you can figure out what that is, and then start to leverage this kind of skills orientation around what are the tasks that need to be done differently? What are the skills to do those tasks? How do we start to develop those skills in other people and then measure them against the tasks? Go start with concrete needed things with the right partner. And I would say, forget the technology for right now. You can do this on Excel or pieces of paper. It's just a question around how do you start to think about skills as a data point, collect data, and then use the data to help the business. I don't know that there's any other way to start to make this change.
Okay, fantastic. Anyone want to come in on that? Anyone got any additional points?
I'd just say that's exactly what I did with a large legacy organisation. Started with a prototype in a real critical area to them, and it was paper-based, and it was modeling it out, what will this look like, and I was co-creating it with the team, and that led then to how it was developed more broadly. So yeah, everything that Sandra said, I totally agree with.
I guess that comes back to the point I think Laurie made earlier on, which is and you, Teresa, about you need your systems thinking, system in place in the first place, and you need your data that can be put on paper in the first place, right? The thinking needs to be done before you bring in any tech to then effectively speed that all up, right? Laurie, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I would also add to that, and I think we're all saying it, but to be more call it out more specific is, you're going to see solutions that are going to come to you and say, here's a 2000 list, skills taxonomy, and you're going to say, oh, okay, I'm going to map everybody to that. Please don't. That's not one. It's not going to get you anywhere. I start very small, where I'm like, okay, let's look at like 10 skills, maybe even 5. Let's just be very specific and try and pick skills. Well, not try, you have to pick skills that your organization actually needs, right? And to say, rather than like, don't measure things that, you already, you have, and it's not going to prepare you for the future. You have to be very forward thinking. So be very targeted to say, and that's also a lot easier with, with Sandra and Teresa's point, so to working with IT, for example, that, they are very concerned with those future deltas. So that's a really good opportunity then to focus on those. So, if you're going to look at that list, of skills, don't pick something like listening or, communications. I mean, they're great, but that's not going to get you really towards the future. So that's where you need to be very targeted.
Okay, that's great. So it can be specific. It might not apply to a huge number of people right now.
No.
It needs
You're
to be
looking at
important.
you're looking at a T shape here. Like you really want that deep dive and to say, this is what I need.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to try and bring us to some, I guess, more summarizing questions, hopefully. Maybe didn't put you on your spot. But some of this has been mentioned already. But if you could call out what legacy thinking needs to be unstuck to be able to embrace the changes and be able to do good with skills-based organizations, what would you call out? So what legacy thinking needs to be unstuck? Anyone want to chime in with an answer to that one? Go, Teresa.
A shortish answer that jobs aren't disappearing just yet, that they're still there, and that's a lot of identity that people hold as well. So that's really important. So that might be some of a legacy area. And also we've got laws coming through like the EU pay directive and similarly in some US states. So that pay transparency and like for like work being paid for is really important, and that will be quite difficult if you haven't got amazing data on skills to prove that, if you're asked to show that comparison, if you get a request in, and also the reporting that's going to be needed on that as well. So that's coming through for next year, and organisations are starting to plan for that now. That learning equals consumption. That's a legacy thinking that I think we can all agree on, that really needs to change, and that performance equals output.
Brilliant. Thank you. Nicely put as well. Anyone want to add any extras in there? Anything you want to throw out in order to make way for the new changes?
I think one that I would add is that this is going to be one of the first times where it's not just change coming from top down. The way that change is happening, we need that leadership has to change significantly. And a lot of organizations I talk to, they think, yeah, everyone needs to learn AI, not me. Right? Like I don't need to do that, right? It's like I'm going to order this for my children, right? And they all need to learn that, and that I think is one of the biggest things that actually needs to change. That this change is not just at a foundational level or with the underlings. This is everyone, and that I think is going to be the difference between companies that excel in this environment and those that do not.
Brilliant. Thanks. Sandra, you got one to add?
I have one just like yay, and then 2 more. So again, coming from like learning research, like the whole consumption thing it blows my mind. It makes me so angry. Like we cannot, as professionals, just put stuff out in the world and assume that it's done something. Like we have to learn how to measure what people know and can do before and after, and use that delta to inform everything, right? So that's number one. I think the second is this, and I don't know what's been in place before, but if you're not data oriented, whatever the like legacy version of that is, like putting your finger in the wind and hoping for the best, I don't know what it is, but like that has to change. Like that we are in a data world now. The business is going to run on data. if L&D is not leveraging and using and creating data, they will get replaced by the business people who do, period. And then the last thing I think, and again, this is back to my like learning research hat, is that I know that we all know this, but we don't practice it. Most learning does not happen in formal context. It doesn't. And so when we equate L&D with training courses, we are necessarily limiting our impact and our ability to help make transparent all the learnings that are taking place in organizations every day outside of our LMS and our training rooms. And so I think that the third orientation I would say that needs to change, or legacy mindset needs to change, is that we are training providers. We're not. We are learning facilitators in whatever form that takes. And we need to start wrapping our heads around what that might look like for us as individuals and for our organizations.
Yeah, thanks. And echo that. I think, yeah, my nightmare scenario for this is that people think they can kind of fill the skill, and in comes micro-learning wheeled out against the skills taxonomy, and like, somehow it matches up. Yeah. So I think that is the nightmare we probably want to avoid, right? And think afresh, right? So yeah, massive +1 on everything you just said there. I'm going to ask us one last question, I think, to round our podcast off, which is really to try and land on some practical advice, particularly for the L&D leaders and managers out there. Is there something you would call out that they can maybe start doing today that might help them get ahead on this journey if they're yet to start it or be part of it? Anyone got any thoughts on that?
One that I always start with, and I actually did this even before skills, people transition to skills, is I usually would have like a skunks work project where I was just targeting one particular thing. And the reason I would do that, because it was outside of my annual plan and all that sort of stuff, right? But why did I do that is because then I actually got a lot of data on length. Now, not all skills are the same, I'll say that, but actually I could get some data on like to present back to say, this is how much it costs, this is how much time. It's not a course. Like I look at it from a seed to fruit upskilling, right? So, right, all the other things that person needed to do, all of the, job shadowing or, practice or, coaching or whatever, all that needed to happen and build that. And I usually was doing that off to the side with maybe just like a very small group of people. But it generated a lot of data before, and then I had something to actually say. When I came to the conversations, I wasn't going to just be tasked with building a course, because I could actually say, these are all the things that I needed to do. And I could bring that back. But, that's, you can't always do that, but I always like to have that little side thing.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks. Anyone else got one they want to throw out there? Some practical advice?
I always say that learning and development are a bit like the central intelligence of an organisation, because they get to talk to different people and see what's going on far more broadly than someone that's purely that in finance. I feel that definitely, and think about all of the years that I spent as a practitioner inside an organisation, and I could sense make and I could connect people and connect things. So I think that would be one area for learning and development. And there are lots and lots of people out there that think this way and think strategically. And the other thing I would say is to be more positive, because I feel like if you look at LinkedIn, there is a lot of a bad rap on there, and there's a lot of great work going on, and there are a lot of wonderful practitioners out there that I get to work with and speak with. You good people today being great examples of that. So I think there are some of the things that I would say is be more positive about what you can do and what you can achieve and your own abilities.
Brilliant, thank you. Sandra, have you got anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, mine's going to be maybe a little bit more, I don't know, fun. I think that you should go take people out for drinks. Go find your business partners, right? The IT people, whoever you think you could work with, and just start asking them questions. I mean, it'd be great if you did your homework first, like go ask ChatGPT, like, how will the skills change for IT roles in the next, like, go figure, but then go have a conversation with them. Be inquisitive, be curious, ask them how, what are the skills? What are they worried about? What are they seeing coming? How soon is it going to happen? Like, just start to become a thought partner with the business, not by thinking first and then telling them, but by asking good questions, reflecting on that, and then coming back with some ideas. So, like, drinks.
Nice, I like it. And that's a form of data, right, as well. Those conversations, they count, right? We're not just talking about numbers in this when we've mentioned data. Well, I'm going to say a massive thank you to all three of you for joining me today. I found that incredibly useful, super interesting, and of course we can keep talking for hours and hours about skills and skills-based organizations, but we have to wrap it up at some point. So thank you.